In Matthew chapter 7, verse 7 through 8, as we just read about that understanding of seeking God and He may be found, I want to invite you to where we're going to actually look at today. And Troy asked me the question, how are you going to get to Matthew chapter 7 from that? But I want to invite you to turn your Bibles to Exodus, and we're going to look at chapter 33. Exodus chapter 33, because there's a statement made here, a question, a proclamation, if you will, by Moses that is going to lead us into what we're going to be talking about today in the next few weeks. The statement here is, his reputation precedes you. Well, sometimes we see that and we say, well, isn't the phrase that your reputation precedes you? That we think about those things. People know us in many ways by our reputation, whatever that lends to, whatever that brings about. We had a coach that I can remember growing up was a tough coach. His reputation preceded him well, right? The way that he challenged us, and I was kind of that last generation where before they made changes the way coaches could function, all those things. I can remember a time where our coach looked at us and said, "Are y'all tired?" And we didn't dare say, "Yes, we're tired." He said, "Are you thirsty?" We were thirsty. He walked over to the table, pushed the table over with all the water on the ground and said, "Now earn it." You can't do that anymore, right? They kind of frown on that. But this coach, his reputation preceded him. I told Jason this story, and he got in trouble by a few of the moms because, just be honest, he called us morons all the time. And so a bunch of moms got together. They actually rallied the husbands to go and talk. And it was kind of funny because as we're there at the end of practice, we see husbands with their heads down going, "We have to come talk to you about something." They didn't want to do it because his reputation preceded him. Right? So he didn't call us that anymore. He didn't call us Monroes from there on out. He said, "See, it's different." But we think about him, that his character. But you know what? When it came to the end, in the games, in those moments, and the expectations he had for us, we played hard for him. Not everyone responded in the same way to his style of coaching, but there was something about the way that he interacted with us. I don't know, maybe it was fear that we felt we needed to do all those kind of things, because we were maybe afraid of how practice would go. I'm not sure. But based off his reputation, we functioned a certain way in the midst of those moments. In Exodus chapter 33, Moses makes this statement. And we'll read what he says in verse 18 and then go back to maybe better understand this. Moses makes a statement, "Now show me your glory." Well, this word glory means reputation. This word glory means, riches, heaviness, testimony. And when we look at this and we see this word as it means right here as far as heaviness, and we mentioned this a little bit Wednesday night, but what Moses is asking is to see the full weight of his glory, the full weight of his presence, the full weight of his reputation. Because when we go back a few verses here in chapter 33, back to verse 12, it says this, "Moses said to the Lord, 'You have been telling me, lead these people, but you have not let me know whom you will send with me. You have said, I know you by name, and you have found favor with me. If you are pleased with me, teach me your ways, so I may know you and continue to find favor with you. Remember that this nation is your people.'" Verse 14. The Lord replied, "My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest." What Moses asked in this moment is he wants to know what the presence of God is. What all that entails. in their lives. Because when you backtrack even further, you go to chapter 32, we find one of the most well-known experiences in the midst of the wilderness. You have what? You have the golden calf. Moses is gone for a while. Moses is no longer there as far as their understanding goes. They say, this Moses, we don't know when he's coming back. We don't know what's going to happen here. We don't know what's going on. And so they asked Aaron to do what? They asked Aaron to build them something that they may worship. Build something that could lend them to, maybe because Moses is no longer here, now we need something else to be our guide, something else to guide our thinking, something else to guide our understanding of why we are where we are. And so what we have here is actually what's come to be known in popular Hebrew culture is the sin of the calf. Now, what's very interesting when you look at this, and let's go back to chapter 32. In chapter 32, we have this statement that is made that really kind of brings a lot of these things together in verse 8. Exodus chapter 32, verse 8. It says, they've been quick to turn away from what I commanded them, this conversation between God and Moses, and have made themselves an idol cast in the shape of a calf. They have bowed down to it and sacrificed to it, and have said, these are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. And what's very interesting is what happens in this moment when they build this calf, when they go through all this, is Aaron, when they challenge them to, not Aaron, but Aaron, right? When they challenge them, they say, make us something that we can worship. Remember, Aaron, it says, he tells them in verse 2, take off the gold earrings that your wives, sons, daughters are wearing, bring them to me. So all the people took them off, those earrings off, and brought them to Aaron. He took what they handed and made it into an idol, cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. Then he said, these are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. When Aaron saw this, he built an altar, verse 5, in front of the calf and announced, tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord. I think a lot of times we read this passage and we don't focus on that part. We see Aaron building this calf. Now we know what he tells Moses. We put all this in that. I just came this, this lame excuse that Aaron has. It just came into. We put it into this. We fashioned all these kind of things, and it just happened to take the shape of a calf, right? All these things. But it's very interesting how Aaron responds to what he did. In front of this, he builds an altar and says, we're going to worship God. We focus a lot on the idol that is made. But don't focus maybe on some of the intentions, maybe on some of the confusion that Aaron has in this moment. There's a lot of things that we do. There's a lot of things that we say and a lot of things that we desire. But when we allow influences to come into play, it may bring about the response that we didn't expect. Let me explain. In Egyptian culture, you had so many gods, right? There's so many gods that they worship. Well, one of them is called Apis, and was described as a god in the shape of a bull. Well, in Canaanite literature, you have a god that is described by the words El, E-L, and it was represented by a bull. Well, you also had some of these gods of Baal that were in the shape of ox, in certain cultures. So all these things. What's the point? There were cultures that the Israelites were in the midst of for generations. That the way that they went about worshiping was to create idols. And the way they went about was some of them were golden calves, and some of them were, all sorts of different things. Kings chapter 12, verses 2 through 33, especially 25 through 33, you've got Jeroboam. Jeroboam creates calves to worship. He puts one up in Bethlehem, puts one up in Dan, and this is how they were going about worshiping. He makes the same statement, actually, that Aaron makes. He says, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt." And so when we look at that in 1 Kings chapter 12, it's verse 28, I believe, where it makes that statement. And then in Exodus chapter 32, verse 8, here's the thing. No matter the intention that Aaron had, no matter the intention that Jeroboam had, the outcome came to be that they worshiped the idols and did not worship God. The outcome came to be that they worshiped created things, not the one who created all things. Even in Hosea chapter 13, there's this, Hosea comes and informing them of this complaint of worshiping of these gods of calves that were put together, that were built by man. No matter the intentions, the result led the people to worship the created things. For Israel, that was their sin of the calf, and that's what popular culture, popular tradition, teaching them was passed on from generation to generation, led to happen. Led people to remember. So I guess the question we have for us is, what's our reputation? When we look at this and we see how does this teach us who God is and what God wants us to know, listen to this. When we allow culture to dictate how we worship and who we worship, the life that comes out from us, the thoughts, the words, the actions that come out for us, our reputation will precede us. If we claim to be those who worship God, if we claim to be those who put God first and everything else may fall into place after that, how does our reputation live up to that? Do we allow popular culture to say, do we allow certain things in this world to dictate how we go about worshiping? Do we allow influences of this world? Now we could say, well, this is the world we live in. Should that influence the way we go about worship? Now listen, I know and understand it may be easier in the culture we live in rather than certain areas of the Middle East and all these areas of what the life that they grew up in and the persecution that is alive and well. I understand those things. And I understand that when certain statements and certain lives are lived out, that responses follow. Right? There are those who are being persecuted for their faith. There are those who are being told that if you make this statement, this will happen. But what's very interesting is we read about those stories because no matter the culture we live in, that does not dictate who is worshipped. That we understand that covenant that is made, that Moses wanted to know, Moses wanted to see the full weight of who God is. Moses wanted to see and wanted to know and wanted to experience God, wanted to come to know Him. Not these gods that man made, not these gods that they bowed down to, whether they were golden calves or whether they were wooden. No matter what, Moses wanted to know who God is. And Moses wanted to be able to worship God and have that confidence in that, and wanted to lead the people to know that God. And if you go on and read throughout the rest of the story, you begin to kind of know more of what Moses is asking. And I want to challenge you as we turn over to the 2 chapters later in Exodus chapter 34 to see God's response to Moses when he says, "Show me your glory." He says, "Show me your glory." In Exodus chapter 34, verse 6, it says, "And he passed in front of Moses proclaiming, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children and their children for the sin of the fathers to the third and fourth generation. Okay, what does this mean? What is Moses coming to know, and what does Moses want to teach us? Throughout all this, it comes back to the covenant that God made with his people. The covenant that God made with Abraham, when he talks about, he says, those who bless will be blessed. Right? Those who curse will be cursed. Those who bring those things, those who understand and are reminded of my faithfulness, those who understand and are reminded of the covenant that I made with my people, this is what will happen. When he tells Moses in response to his question, he says, you want to see God maybe not with your eyes, but you want to see him with your heart, with your mind, with everything that you are. I want you to know who God is. I want you to know who this presence is that goes with you, that helps you in those moments that when the culture, when the world that you live in spite of the influences that you've grown up in your life, and you've grown up for generation after generation, I want you to know who God is. He said he is compassionate. He is gracious. He is slow to anger, and abounding in love. See, it's not just so much that he kind of dials back on the anger. He goes to the other extreme with abounding love. 1 John chapter 3. See what great love the Father has lavished upon us, that we should become children of God. He says, and that is what we are. And he comes to show us and comes to tell us that this is how we know what love is. The compassionate, gracious, abounding love of God. The faithfulness that God has for us. He says to Moses, you want to know what my presence means in your life? You want to know how my presence can help you in this life? That when everything around you may lead you to live and worship in a different way, that may lead you and guide you to all this other kind of understanding in the way that you're about to go, that you should go about your life. You want to know what it means to live in the presence of God, live in his compassion, live in his grace, live in his faithfulness. Let that guide your heart. Let that guide your mind. Let that guide your steps every moment in life. He says this, do you want to know me? Seek and you will find. Ask, you will receive. Knock and the door will be open. In many ways, that's what Moses asked in Exodus 33:18. Show me your glory. Let me seek you. Let me ask you. Let me knock. And he says, let me tell you who I am. Let me tell you what I'm about. His reputation precedes him. They says they know him by his reputation. When we look at this, we say, okay, what kind of response does that bring about in our life? That the covenant making and the covenant keeping God has always and will always and can always be found. It takes us seeking him out. It takes us saying, in spite of all the noise, in spite of all the distractions, in spite of everything that may be going on around us that leads us so many other ways. And it doesn't take us long to look at our culture and see that we live in a world that doesn't seek him out in the way that he should be sought. Sometimes, sadly, we realize that when we look in the mirror. But what we learn is God is always there to be found. And if we want to lead others to Him, we shouldn't allow the influences of this world to dictate how that happens. Now, we may come with the same, let's be honest, lame excuse that Aaron had. Oh, well, this just kind of came out. We're all going to be held accountable for our actions, aren't we? We're all going to be held accountable for the choices that we made and the things that we did. We can come up with excuse after excuse. But ultimately, when we ask our question is, what's our sin? What's our moment that led people astray? And how do we respond to that? Do we just say, well, it happened? Or do we live lives in response to get people back on the right track? Do we live lives in response to say, okay, I know it happened, but here's what we're going to do. From this moment on, we're not going to allow the influences of this world. We're not going to allow the influences of this world that lead us away from Him to be our guide any longer. We're not going to allow the voices that may be loud, the voices that may be constant in our life, we're not going to allow those voices to dictate how we go about worshiping God. We're not going to allow those things to influence us any longer. And from right here, right now, we're going to take a stand and say, no more. We worship God. We worship Him. It may not be the popular thing to do. We talked about it in our class, didn't we, Mary? It's time for the majority to stand up. And stop living like we're the minority. It's time for us to stand up and take a stand and say, this is who we are, this is who we worship. And from this moment on, this is who we will be. And we will lead generation after generation until Jesus returns to live lives worshiping Him and not allowing this world to influence us anymore. God made a covenant with His people. God made a promise to His people. And if we learn nothing about God, He is one who keeps His promises. And He says, trust me. Live in obedience. Ask, seek, knock. I'm going to answer. I will be available to you. Let's pray. Father God, we thank you. God, we thank you for the opportunities that we have, God, the freedom that is before us where we get to assemble, God. We get to assemble as a faith family and to worship you, God. God, and we know that there are those in this world that want to stop us from doing what we're doing. But God, we pray that your power would be seen. And that we would not allow those things to influence our thoughts. We would not allow those things to influence our minds, our hearts, everything that we are. God, we would stand for your truth. And that, God, when they tell our story, that it would lead others to you. That when they speak of those who came together as a faith family, would be those who came together in boldness and who lived out what they were taught so that others could see your glory. God, we thank you. It's in your Son's name we pray. So again, I ask you, how will your story be told? What will be your reputation? Will it be those who don't allow voices and ungodly influences of this world to persuade you. When they tell our story, when they tell about a God who guides us every step of the way, that knows we're not perfect. We know the one who is. How will they tell our story? The response to that is up to us. Today, maybe part of your story involves your surrendering to Him. Maybe you want to see the glory of God. You want to see the full weight, the full measure of who He is. To be immersed in the waters of baptism, to come out a new creation. Maybe there's still questions that you have about this God. Remember, He can always, has always, and will always be found. We just need